You know that feeling when you're at the absolute peak of your game? That perfect moment of flow where your brain is firing on all cylinders and the universe just seems to bend to your will? I was there. I was Michael Jordan in the '97 finals. I was Gordon Ramsay finding the lamb sauce. I was, to be slightly less dramatic, a guy in a comfortable chair in a quiet room, about to digitally sign a consulting contract that would single-handedly fund my crippling addiction to vintage synthesizers for the next decade. My face, professionally lit and framed, was beamed across the country to a panel of venture capitalists who were nodding along, their expressions a pleasing mixture of impressed and intimidated. I was weaving a beautiful narrative, a tale of synergy and proactive disruption that was mostly nonsense, but it was my nonsense, and they were buying every word. So, by leveraging a containerized microservice architecture, I said, leaning in with my best, "I'm about to give you the secret sauce" expression. We're not just future-proofing the back end, we're creating a paradigm of scalable. My screen froze. My own face, locked in an expression of profound insight, stared back at me. A single, ugly block of pixels marred my left eyebrow. The VCs were frozen too, one with his mouth half open, looking like a bewildered trout. "Hello?" I said to the silent room. Nothing. The little green light on my webcam was still on, a mocking beacon of a connection that no longer existed. My Wi-Fi icon, usually a symbol of unwavering strength, now showed that dreaded little yellow triangle. An error. A problem in paradise. I did what any sane, highly trained technology professional would do. I swore under my breath and then jiggled the mouse, as if that would somehow coax the electrons back into alignment. It did not. This wasn't just a glitch, this was a flatline. I grabbed my phone to tether my connection, a standard emergency procedure. But my phone, my sleek $1,000 lifeline to the digital world, was a brick. A beautiful glass and aluminum brick, up in the corner, where 5 glorious bars of LTE usually resided, was a single, mocking bar with a tiny X beside it. No signal. "Okay, don't panic, this is a drill. You're Alex. You build networks for a living. You solve these problems." I went through the classic tech guy denial cycle. First, reboot the router. I unplugged it, counted to a slow, deliberate 20, and plugged it back in. The lights blinked in their familiar, hopeful sequence, then settled on a solid, angry orange. No internet. Second, reboot the phone. I held down the power button, watched the screen go black, then flare back to life with the corporate logo. It booted up, searched for a signal, and gave up with a pathetic little sigh. Still no bars. Third, and this is the last resort of the truly desperate, I walked around the room holding my phone up in different corners, waving it near the window like I was trying to summon a digital rain god. I probably looked like a lunatic trying to find the right angle for a TV antenna in 1978. Nothing. Not a flicker. My heart started to pound a little faster. This wasn't a me problem. An equipment failure on my end would be annoying but fixable. This felt bigger. The silence was too complete. I have a hardwired local network connecting my house to my next-door neighbor Dave's. It's a little side project we set up for gaming and sharing large files, a sort of two-house intranet. I pulled up the feed for his Ring doorbell camera. The little wheel spun and spun before timing out. Offline. I sent him a message through our local network chat client. It sat there, unread. Of course it was unread. His computer was probably offline too. This was a full-blown outage, a digital blackout. I'm not talking about the power. The lights were on. The air conditioning was humming. This was worse. This was an information apocalypse. A strange sound began to filter in from the open window. It was faint at first, then grew louder. It was a distant, wailing cry. I think it was Carol from 2 doors down. I imagined her, standing in her chintz-draped living room, phone held aloft, realizing with dawning horror that she couldn't get her daily dose of cat videos on Facebook. The horror. The absolute, unmitigated horror. I slumped back into my chair. The VC deal was gone, vanished into the ether. My connection to the world was severed. My day was ruined, my whole week, probably. Just as I was about to descend into a full-blown Luddite despair, a single notification pinged on my laptop. It was the only thing that had gotten through. A ghost in the machine. It had managed to slip in via my emergency backup satellite link, a slow, expensive connection I kept active for just such an Armageddon. It was an email. The sender, the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. The subject line was so smug, so self-congratulatory, that it practically radiated condescension through the screen. A victory for community health and aesthetic harmony. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open, my eyes narrowing as I read the first line. And that's when I knew. This wasn't an accident, this was an execution. I read the email aloud to the empty room, my voice dripping with the kind of sarcastic venom usually reserved for corporate mission statements. "Dear residents of Oakwood Estates," I began, adopting a high, nasally tone. "It is with immense pride and a deep sense of communal accomplishment that your HOA board announces the successful decommissioning of the unsightly and hazardous cellular transmission tower located at the edge of our community." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Decommissioning. Such a sterile, bureaucratic word for what they'd actually done. They hadn't just turned it off. They had, with what I could only imagine was a great deal of ceremony, murdered it. Following a tireless 3-month campaign of petitions, informative leaflet distribution, and impassioned presentations at the town hall, I continued, we have successfully convinced the township and the cellular provider of the clear and present danger this tower posed to our collective well-being. The email, penned by none other than our glorious leader, Brenda, chairwoman of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, Committee for Aesthetic and Community Harmony, was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive propaganda. It didn't just inform, it gloated. Of course, she included links to her overwhelming evidence. I clicked on the first one. It took my satellite link a full minute to load a web page that looked like it had been designed in 1999. The site was called, quote, wellnessconspiracy.net. Its banner was a grainy picture of a cell tower with a skull and crossbones superimposed over it. The article, riddled with spelling errors and wild logical leaps, claimed that 5G cellular signals were a primary cause of everything from chronic fatigue and leaky gut syndrome to a noticeable decline in the vibrancy of local petunias. The second link was to a personal blog written by a woman who claimed she could feel the negative energy from Wi-Fi routers in her teeth. I slammed my laptop shut. Brenda. It was always Brenda. I pictured her at that town hall meeting, a woman in her mid-50s with a helmet of perfectly coiffed hair and the righteous fury of someone who just discovered the dangers of dihydrogen monoxide. I could see her standing at the podium, armed with a 3-inch binder full of her printed-out blog posts, bamboozling the poor, overworked town council members with her weaponized ignorance. She'd probably worn them down with sheer, unrelenting persistence. Brenda didn't just have opinions, she had crusades. My interactions with her had been few, but memorable. There was the time she'd shown up at my door with a ruler to measure the height of my lawn, later leaving a laminated, passive-aggressive note on my door informing me that my grass was a full 1/4 inch over the regulation 3.5 inches. Then there was the HOA meeting she called to debate a proposal to ban the color beige from all exterior paint palettes because, according to an article she'd read, it was psychologically oppressive and promoted a sense of suburban ennui. She wasn't just a stickler for rules, She was an innovator in the field of creating new, more pointless rules. She saw herself as a benevolent guardian, protecting us from the horrors of an untrimmed hedge or an unapproved mailbox color. And now, she had escalated. She had moved from aesthetics to infrastructure. She'd single-handedly hurled our entire zip code back to the dark ages of 1998, a time of dial-up modems and having to actually talk to your family. A primal rage began to bubble up from my gut. It wasn't just about the lost contract or the inconvenience. It was the sheer, unadulterated stupidity of it all. It was an offense against logic, a crime against progress. One person, armed with a surplus of free time and a deficit of critical thinking, had decided for hundreds of others that they no longer deserved access to modern civilization. An ordinary man would have complained on the neighborhood Facebook group, if it were still accessible. A slightly more proactive man might have started a counter-petition, doomed to languish in bureaucratic hell. But I'm not an ordinary man. I'm a man who, on a particularly boring Tuesday afternoon a few years ago, bought a decommissioned FEMA mobile command center at a government surplus auction for less than the price of a used minivan. A slow, mischievous grin spread across my face. My anger began to cool, replaced by a cold, thrilling sense of purpose. Brenda wanted to play God with our cell service? Fine. Two can play at that game. It was time to open the garage. My garage is my sanctuary. It's oversized, climate-controlled, and the floor is coated in a glossy gray epoxy that's cleaner than most people's kitchen counters. On the left sits my sensible daily driver, a German sedan that whispers efficiency and restraint. In the middle sits my weekend car, a vintage American muscle car that screams poor financial decisions and impending hearing loss. And in the third bay, taking up every last inch of space, sits the Wanderer. I flicked on the overhead fluorescent lights, and they bathed the vehicle in a sterile, revealing glow. The Wanderer is a beast. It's a custom-built, heavy-duty truck chassis, about the size of a large delivery van, painted a faded, utilitarian olive drab. It's a masterpiece of brutalist engineering, a cross between a UPS truck and a satellite news van, with various sealed panels, reinforced bumpers, and thick, run-flat tires. On its roof, a collection of antennas and communication dishes lay folded down, hinting at its true purpose. Meet the Wanderer, my impulse buy, my testament to questionable financial decisions, my what if the world ends and I still need to stream Netflix in 4K quo insurance policy. I found it on a GSA auction site, listed under miscellaneous vehicles. The description was dry and technical. Mobile Command Center, C4, I-equipped, diesel, operational status, good. It had been used by FEMA for disaster relief coordination in remote areas. To the government, it was a depreciated asset. To me, it was the coolest toy I had ever seen. It came with coffee-stained operational manuals thick enough to stop a bullet, a faint, lingering smell of government-issued despair, and enough broadcasting power to give a ham radio operator a religious experience. Over the past couple of years, it had become my pet project. I'd ripped out the old, outdated 2000 S-era computers and replaced them with a modern rack-mounted server system. I'd upgraded the broadcast arrays, boosted the power of its independent generator, and essentially turned it into a personal, portable, military-grade cell tower on wheels. I never, ever thought I'd have a practical reason to use it. Until today. Today, Brenda had created the exact kind of localized, man-made disaster the Wanderer was built for. I unlatched the heavy side door and climbed inside. The interior was a nerd's paradise. A single command chair bolted to the floor sat before a wraparound console of monitors and switchboards. I settled into the worn vinyl and began the startup sequence. First, the power. I flipped a heavy-duty caged toggle switch labeled Main Generator. A moment of silence, then a low rumble started from a compartment on the side of the truck. The diesel generator coughed to life. Its steady, powerful hum, a satisfying thrum that vibrated through the concrete floor of the garage. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated capability. The console lights flickered on one by one. Screens that had been dark moments before now glowed with system diagnostics, network analyzers, and signal strength meters, all of which, for the moment, read a flat, depressing 0. My plan was simple, elegant, and beautifully petty. I wasn't just going to turn on a hotspot, I was going to create my own private, hyper-local cellular network. The Wanderer's system was designed to tap into a satellite uplink and then rebroadcast that signal as a standard 4G LTE network over a multi-block radius. I would become the de facto cell provider for Oakwood Estates. I navigated through the system interface, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Network name, SSID. I typed it in with relish. The Brenda-proof network. Password, try McCarran. It was perfect. With the software configured, it was time for the final, physical step. I looked at the console, at the array of buttons and switches. My eyes landed on the most important one. A large, satisfyingly red button, protected by a clear plastic flip cover, just like in the movies. The label beneath it read, Mast Deploy. I flipped up the cover. I pressed the button. A deep hydraulic hum joined the thrum of the generator. Outside, on the roof of the truck, the primary broadcast mast, a thick, telescopic antenna array, began to majestically, inexorably, extend towards the ceiling of my garage. It rose slowly, a silver finger pointing towards the sky, a silent promise of the bandwidth to come. I grinned, grabbing the keys. I fired up the truck's engine, a deep, throaty diesel roar that was 100 times louder than the generator. Putting the beast in reverse, I began to slowly, carefully back it out of the garage. It emerged into the bright afternoon sun of my driveway like a creature from another, more serious world, its extended mast nearly brushing the rain gutters. It sat there, on the pristine asphalt of my driveway, looking as out of place as a tank in a flower garden. The digital dark age of Oakwood Estates was about to end. Seated in the captain's chair of The Wanderer, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the culmination of years of idle tinkering and one very wise impulse buy. The generator hummed its steady song, the screens glowed with potential, and the antenna mast stood tall against the clear blue sky, a middle finger to Brenda's new world order. I performed the final checks, power levels, stable, satellite uplink, locked and strong, network configuration, offensively perfect. My finger hovered over the digital Activate Broadcast button on the main touchscreen. I savored the moment, then tapped it. For a second, nothing happened. The world remained just as it was. Then, my own phone, which I'd placed on the console beside me, chimed. It was a beautiful sound, the sound of a single, solitary notification pushing through the digital silence. Then it chimed again, and again, and again. A dam had broken. A glorious, cascading waterfall of delayed notifications flooded my device. Texts from my mom asking why I hadn't called back. A dozen panicked emails from the consulting gig, wondering if I'd fallen off the face of the earth. And, most gloriously of all, a high-resolution cat meme from a friend. A beacon of civilization's return. I looked at the status bar at the top of my phone's screen. 5 perfect, solid bars of LTE. I ran a speed test. The needle shot up, hitting a number that was nearly double what the old community tower had ever provided. It was beautiful. Nature was healing. My first act as the benevolent dictator of neighborhood telecommunications was to spread the gospel. I opened my texts and sent a message to Dave. "Me. Check your phone. And you're welcome." I watched out the reinforced window of the Wanderer. A moment later, the front door of Dave's house flew open. He came sprinting out onto his lawn, phone held aloft like the Olympic torch, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face. He stared at his phone, then at the monstrous green truck in my driveway, then back at his phone. He ran over, stopping at the edge of my driveway as if there were an invisible force field. "Dude!" he yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. "How? What is that thing? Is that legal?" "It's a high-performance, multiband signal propagation unit," I called back, leaning out the door. "And it's parked on my property, running on its own power, so yes, mostly. You want the password?" I didn't wait for an answer. I grabbed a piece of cardboard and a thick black marker. In my neatest block letters, I wrote out a simple, welcoming message. I hopped out of the truck and taped it to the side, facing the street. Free high-speed Wi-Fi and cellular. Network, the Brenda-proof network. Password, try McCarran. Dave just stared, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You are a magnificent bastard," he whispered with reverence. The effect on the neighborhood was almost instantaneous. It was like turning the lights on in a dark room. People started emerging from their homes, drawn by the low hum of the generator and the sudden, miraculous rebirth of their digital lives. A teenager on a skateboard nearly wiped out when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He stopped, stared at his screen in disbelief, then looked up and saw the Wanderer. His eyes went wide. A small crowd began to gather at a respectful distance on the sidewalk. Phones were out, not held up in a desperate search for a signal, but pointed at my truck, taking pictures. The neighborhood began to split right before my eyes. The younger parents, the teenagers, the people who worked from home, they looked at the Wanderer with something approaching religious awe. I saw a woman who I knew was a freelance graphic designer nearly weep with joy as she connected her laptop. But then there were the others, the older, more Brenda-aligned residents, the ones who spent their days polishing their mailboxes and measuring their neighbors' lawns. They scowled. They stood with their arms crossed, whispering to each other, occasionally clutching their chests as if my broadcast signal was giving them instant heart palpitations. They weren't seeing a solution. They were seeing a problem. They were seeing a violation. They were seeing something new and loud and different, and they did not like it one bit. The seeds of civil war had been sown in the fertile ground of our perfectly manicured lawns, and I knew with absolute certainty who was about to march across the battlefield to lead the first charge. I didn't have to wait long. I'd just settled into a comfortable lawn chair next to the Wanderer, cracking open a cold soda and enjoying the gentle breeze, when I saw her. Brenda. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't running. She was worse. She was marching. She moved with the slow, deliberate pace of an invading army, her sensible walking shoes making determined slapping sounds on the pavement. She was flanked by her two most loyal lieutenants, a woman named Carol, who always looked perpetually disappointed in everything, and a man named Gary, whose primary personality trait was owning a leaf blower and using it at 7 a.m. on Saturdays. And in her hand, Brenda clutched her ultimate weapon, a clipboard. They stopped at the edge of my property line, a holy trinity of suburban outrage. Brenda surveyed the scene. Me in my chair, the humming green behemoth, the sign with its insolent password, the small but growing crowd of grateful neighbors. Her lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. She didn't address the crowd. She addressed me. She spoke in a low, dangerous tone, the kind a principal uses right before they suspend you. "Alexander, What is the meaning of this monstrosity? I took a slow sip of my soda, making sure the ah of satisfaction was audible. I feigned ignorance, looking from the truck to my lawn chair to the sky. Monstrosity? I'm not sure what you mean, Brenda. It's a beautiful day. A little warm, maybe. Are you referring to Gary's shirt? Because that floral pattern is a choice. Gary flushed. Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. You know perfectly well what I mean, she hissed, taking a single, bold step onto my driveway. This vehicle. It's a commercial vehicle. It is a clear and egregious violation of Section 8, Paragraph C of the HOA bylaws, which explicitly prohibits the parking of commercial trucks on residential properties. She said Paragraph C, with the kind of smug finality a lawyer uses when presenting irrefutable DNA evidence. This was her checkmate. I smiled. Ah, Brenda, an excellent point. I'm glad to see someone's been doing their homework. I reached over and picked up a tablet from the small table next to me, which was, of course, gloriously connected to my flawless network. I tapped the screen a few times. However, you must have missed the fine print. See, the Wanderer here isn't registered as a commercial vehicle. I had it reclassified. It's officially registered with the DMV as a recreational vehicle. Same class as a Winnebago. I turned the tablet towards her, showing her a high-resolution scan of the vehicle's registration. Her eyes darted back and forth, trying to find a flaw. And since I am, at this very point, recreating, I continued, gesturing to my comfortable chair and refreshing beverage, I believe I'm perfectly in the clear. Want some Wi-Fi? I hear the Petunia conspiracy blogs are loading extra fast today. Oh. Her composure, so carefully constructed, finally cracked. A splotchy red rash appeared on her neck. She abandoned the clipboard and resorted to pointing. And that thing, she shrieked, her finger jabbing towards the sky at my antenna mast. That is an unapproved structural modification. It's an eyesore. And the noise, that generator, it's a public nuisance. I'm getting a headache from the vibrations. This was her scattergun approach. Throw enough accusations and hope one sticks. But I was ready. I, too, had done my homework. Another series of excellent points, Brenda, I said, my voice calm and infuriatingly patient. I swiped to another screen on my tablet. Let's break these down. First, the unapproved structure. According to the bylaws you cherish so much, a structure is defined as a permanent or semi-permanent installation with a foundation. My antenna is attached to a vehicle with wheels. It can be moved. Therefore, it is not a structure. It's an accessory, like a very, very tall hat. I paused to let that sink in. Second, the noise. I pulled up an app on my phone, a decibel meter. I held it up. The reading fluctuated between 50 and 55 decibels, about the same as a quiet conversation or a modern refrigerator. As you can see, the generator is a modern sound-dampened diesel unit. It's currently operating well below the 65 decibel limit for daytime noise, outlined in City Ordinance 113.8. I have a copy of the ordinance right here if you'd like to see it. I was in my element. This wasn't a shouting match. It was a live-action debugging session. Brenda would present an error, a supposed violation, and I would present the elegant, well-documented code that proved her wrong. She was running on outdated, buggy software fueled by emotion and rumor. I was running on pure, unadulterated logic and a splash of high-grade spite. Defeated on every technical and legal front, she fell back on her last, most potent weapon: pure, unadulterated fear-mongering. "This is not over, Alexander," she snarled, her voice dropping again. "This isn't about your little rules and loopholes. This is about safety. You are poisoning this neighborhood with your electrosmog. We will have a special session. We will have you fined into oblivion. You'll see." With that, she spun on her heel and marched away, her two sycophants trailing in her wake like pilot fish. The small crowd of my supporters broke into a smattering of applause. From his porch, Dave gave me a slow, reverent clap. The first battle was over. I had held the line. But as I watched Brenda's stiff, retreating back, I knew the war had just begun, and she was about to call in reinforcements. Brenda, true to form, was not one to accept defeat gracefully. Less than an hour after her retreat, just as the sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon and cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, a police cruiser rolled slowly down our street and pulled up to the curb in front of my house. It wasn't a lights and siren arrival. It was quiet, almost hesitant, as if the car itself was embarrassed to be there. Two officers got out. The one on the driver's side was older, with a thick mustache, and a world-weary slump to his shoulders that suggested he'd seen every flavor of suburban nonsense imaginable. This was Officer Miller. The passenger-side officer, Jenkins, was younger, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy haircut and an eager, slightly confused expression. Miller approached me where I still sat in my lawn chair, a fresh soda in hand. He was holding a small notepad, which he squinted at with the air of a man trying to decipher ancient runes. "Good evening, sir," he sighed. "I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Jenkins. We got a call about—" He squinted at his notes again. "An unauthorized private telecommunications broadcast causing a public nuisance and potential biohazard." He looked up from the pad, then at the giant green truck, then at me. His expression was one of profound resignation. "Evening, officers," I said, standing up. "I'm Alex. Can I offer you a cold bottle of water? It's a warm day for dealing with whatever this is." I was deliberately polite, calm, and cooperative. The last thing I wanted was to be the crazy guy in his driveway yelling at the cops. I was the reasonable, helpful citizen. Jenkins, the younger one, looked genuinely curious. Miller just looked tired. "So," Miller said, foregoing the water. "Care to tell me what's going on here, in your own words? And please, use small words. It's been a long day." "Happy to," I said with a smile. Long story short, our HOA president, Brenda, successfully lobbied the town to shut down the only cell tower that serves this neighborhood. Did it this morning. Plunged us all into the Stone Age. I work from home, and I kind of need the internet to do that. So I turned on my backup system. I gestured to the Wanderer. It's just a big mobile hotspot, really. An RV with a fancy antenna. Jenkins's eyes lit up. He was a techie. I could spot one a mile away. "Whoa, is that a decommissioned FEMA MCOM 7? He asked, his voice full of awe. "I've only ever seen pictures of those." Miller shot him a look that said, "Stay on task, rookie." "So, is this thing legal?" Miller asked, getting back to the point. "Like FCC-wise?" 100%, I confirmed. It operates on licensed consumer cellular and Wi-Fi bands, just like any other router or hotspot. The power level is higher than your standard home unit, obviously, but it's still well within the federally approved limits for unlicensed broadcasting. It's all self-contained, not connected to any city infrastructure. It's basically the world's most elaborate RV. I can show you the registration and the tech specs if you like. "No, that won't be," Miller started to say, but he was cut off. "Officers, arrest this man!" Brenda had apparently been watching from her window, and seeing that I was not immediately being put in handcuffs, she came power-walking back across the street, her face a mask of indignation. "He's breaking the law!" she insisted, planting herself between me and the officers. Miller turned to her with a sigh so deep it seemed to draw all the energy out of the surrounding air. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, "what law exactly is he breaking?" "The HOA rules," she sputtered. "The bylaws, the commercial vehicle, the nuisance, the illegal broadcasting." Miller held up a hand to stop the torrent. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the Homeowners Association is a private organization." Your bylaws are a civil matter. It's a dispute between you and him. It is not a police matter. As far as I can tell," he continued, pulling out his own department-issued smartphone, "his vehicle is legally parked on his own property. He isn't breaking any city ordinances regarding noise, and he hasn't broken any state or federal laws." He glanced down at his phone, a small smile touching the corner of his mustache. "In fact, thanks to him, my partner here can finally stop complaining and stream the game highlights in the car. We've had dead spots in this part of town for years." Jenkins, who had been trying to look professional, failed to suppress a grin and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Brenda was speechless. She looked from Miller's dismissive face to Jenkins's happy one. To me, standing there radiating pure, unadulterated victory. She had called in the cavalry, and the cavalry had just asked for the Wi-Fi password. "So, ma'am," Miller concluded, putting his phone away, "please don't call 911 for this again unless a real crime is being committed. Have a good evening." He tipped his hat to me. "Sir?" "Officers," I said with a nod. They got back in their cruiser and drove away, leaving Brenda standing alone on the pavement. She was a monument to thwarted ambition. I gave her a polite, infuriatingly pleasant little wave goodbye. She just stood there, sputtering in impotent rage, before finally turning and stomping back to her house. The Queen had been checked. Now it was time to fortify my castle. The victory over Brenda and the police was sweet, but I knew it was temporary. She wasn't the type to give up. She'd just retreat, regroup, and find a new angle of attack. Her next battlefield would be the official one, a fully fledged HOA meeting, and on that field, her beloved bylaws were the law of the land. If I was going to win this war, I had to beat her at her own game. Later that evening, my office transformed into a war room. The main monitor, usually displaying stock tickers or lines of code, was now filled with a 300-page PDF document, the Oakwood Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. It was a masterpiece of legalistic gibberish, a dense forest of subsections and appendices designed to bore any reader into submission. Dave came over, a six-pack of craft beer under his arm. He'd gone from an amused observer to an active co-conspirator. "She's not going to let this go, man," he said, popping 2 bottles open and handing one to me. "I saw her on her porch, on the phone. She was yelling. She's definitely organizing a petition or calling for an emergency meeting." "Let her," I said, taking a long pull from the bottle. "We're going to be ready." We settled in for a long night of what I affectionately called opposition research. We dove into the bylaw labyrinth, reading it line by line, looking for weaknesses, loopholes, and contradictions. To Dave, it was torture. To me, it was like cracking code. "Dude, this is unreadable," Dave groaned after 20 minutes, rubbing his eyes. "Listen to this. All auxiliary structures, including but not limited to sheds, gazebos, and decorative well housings, must adhere to the pre-approved color palette as outlined in Appendix C4. He threw his hands up. "What does that even mean?" "It means Brenda has successfully weaponized the color beige," I said, scrolling through the document. "But look at this. This is the key." I highlighted a section and read it aloud. "A structure is hereby defined as any object or edifice permanently or semi-permanently affixed to the property by means of a concrete foundation, posts sunk into the ground, or other such non-mobile fixtures." Dave looked at me, confused. "So?" "So," I said, grinning. "The Wanderer has wheels. 4 of them, to be exact. It is, by their own definition, not a structure, it's a vehicle. We're legally golden on that front." We kept digging, unearthing one absurdly outdated or exploitable rule after another. There was a rule prohibiting the keeping of livestock, fowl, or poultry of any kind, which we joked meant our Thanksgiving turkeys were technically in violation. There was a rule about yard art needing to be tasteful and subject to committee approval, which gave me a few terrible, wonderful ideas involving flamingos. And then I found it, the golden ticket. Section 12, paragraph F, I said, my voice low with excitement. Flagpoles, get this. A single flag pole, for the purpose of displaying the national or state flag, is permitted per lot, provided it does not exceed a height of 20 feet from ground level. Dave looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face as he saw the gears turning in my head. No, he said. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, I replied. The Wanderer is a fantastic temporary solution. It won the battle. But it's loud, it's ugly, and it runs on diesel. It gives Brenda ammunition. What I need is a permanent solution, something silent, something discreet, something that is, according to her own sacred texts, 100% legal. The plan began to form, elegant and audacious. A Trojan horse, hidden in plain sight. I started my proactive defense immediately. I went outside and took dozens of time-stamped photos of the Wanderer from every angle. I created a meticulous log of the generator's runtime and downloaded the data from my decibel meter app. I even spent an hour building a simple, elegant web page, hosted on the Wanderer's own server, of course, with a real-time network status indicator, a link to the FCC regulations, and a polite, point-by-point FAQ section that scientifically and legally debunked every single one of Brenda's claims. I was building a fortress of pedantry, a castle of malicious compliance. Brenda wanted to fight a war of paperwork. I would bury her in it. The flagpole was going to be my masterstroke. A few days passed in a state of armed truce. My network was running flawlessly. The neighborhood was bathed in glorious, high-speed internet. I'd become a local folk hero to about half the population. The other half, Brenda's loyalists, would glare at my house whenever they passed, as if they could will the Wanderer away with pure disapproval. I knew Brenda was plotting, but her next move was more theatrical than I could have ever imagined. A flyer appeared on everyone's doorstep. It announced a special, urgent, community wellness seminar to be held on the public sidewalk in front of my house. The topic? The invisible dangers in our air, understanding electrosmog and harmonic disruption. The guest of honor, the flyer proclaimed, was a Dr. Alistair Finch, a certified bioresonance harmonizer and energy field analyst. I had to read that twice. It was the most magnificently meaningless title I had ever encountered. The day of the seminar arrived. Brenda set up a folding table and a pitcher of lemon water. About 15 of her most dedicated followers gathered, their faces etched with concern. Then, Dr. Finch arrived. He was a tall, thin man with a flowing purple scarf, a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, and an air of profound, unearned wisdom. In his hand, he held his primary instrument of scientific inquiry, a black, pistol-gripped device with a little antenna and a series of flashing LEDs. Any ghost-hunting enthusiast would have recognized it instantly. It was a standard EMF meter. Dr. Finch began his presentation. He spoke in vague, ominous tones about chaotic energy fields and negative harmonic resonance that were disrupting the natural vibrational state of the community. He waved his ghost meter around dramatically. As you can see, he said, gesturing to the silent air, the ambient chaotic energy is at a baseline level. The lights on his meter blinked a calm green. But now, he turned and pointed the device directly at the Wanderer. The meter immediately shrieked. Its lights flashed a frantic, angry red. The crowd gasped in unison, clutching their pearls and their small dogs. "The levels are off the charts," Finch declared triumphantly. This machine is flooding your homes, your bodies, your very cells with disruptive frequencies. I'd been watching this whole circus from my office window. Now, it was time for my entrance. I had been anticipating this. I walked out my front door with a patient smile, wheeling a small utility cart. On the cart was my kitchen microwave and a glass of water. I'd run an extension cord from my porch outlet. "Fascinating stuff, Doctor," I said politely, interrupting his flow. The crowd turned to look at me. "Truly groundbreaking research. I wonder if you could help me with a little experiment." Finch looked annoyed at being interrupted, but Brenda gave him a nod, eager to see me publicly humiliated. "Fine," he sniffed. "What is it?" "Could you please measure the chaotic energy coming from my truck one more time?" I asked. He obliged, pointing his device at the Wanderer. Once again, it screamed and flashed red. As I said, toxic levels. "Incredible," I said, nodding seriously. "Now, if you wouldn't mind..." I pointed to the microwave on my cart. "Could you measure that?" Finch scoffed. "A simple kitchen appliance? It's hardly..." "Indulge me," I said with a smile. He rolled his eyes and pointed the meter at the dormant microwave. The lights were green. "See? Nothing." "Ah, but I haven't turned it on yet," I said. I pressed the Add 30 seconds button. The microwave hummed to life. The turntable began to rotate, and the little light inside illuminated the glass of water. The effect on Dr. Finch's device was instantaneous and spectacular. It didn't just beep, it let out a continuous, ear-splitting shriek. Every single light on it flashed red so fast it looked like a strobe light at a rave. It was 10 times more frantic than the reading from the Wanderer. The crowd stared, completely silent. Finch looked down at his shrieking device, then at the microwave, a look of pure confusion on his face. I let the moment hang in the air before speaking. "Fascinating, Doctor," I said, addressing the crowd but looking at him. "It seems my attempt to heat up a cup of tea is generating far more negative harmonic resonance than my entire communications array. That's because that device you're holding isn't a bioresonance harmonizer. It's a simple EMF meter. It measures non-ionizing electromagnetic fields. They're emitted by literally anything that uses electricity. Your watch, your phone, that microwave, even the electrical wiring in every one of your houses." Finch began to stammer. It's a different kind of energy. It's the chaotic frequencies, the wavelength." "You're right," I said, seizing on his words. "Let's talk about frequency. The LTE signal from my truck is broadcast at around 2 gigahertz. The frequency from this standard kitchen microwave, about 2.45 gigahertz. So, technically speaking, heating up your lean cuisine is more chaotic and higher frequency than my network. Unless you're all planning on throwing out your microwaves, you have nothing to worry about." I turned off the microwave. The meter fell silent. Any other questions? There were none. Dr. Alistair Finch was utterly, completely, and publicly discredited. The crowd didn't know the science, but they understood being made to look foolish. A few people started to snicker. Dave, watching from his porch, was practically doubled over with laughter. Brenda, her face a thundercloud of mortification, quickly grabbed her expert by the arm and hustled him away down the street. I had won a major battle in the court of public opinion. But as I wheeled my microwave back inside, I knew Brenda's last stand would be at the official HOA meeting. And for that, my beautiful, noisy, diesel-powered Wanderer wasn't the right weapon. I needed something permanent. I needed a flagpole. The next morning I was on the phone. Not my cell phone, but the landline I kept for just such occasions when I needed to sound like a serious, respectable homeowner and not a guy running a private telecom service out of a military truck. I was calling local contracting companies. The first 2 hung up on me, after I explained what I wanted. The third call, however, was different. A gruff voice answered, "Gus is contracting. What do you need built?" I took a deep breath and launched into my pitch. "Hi, my name is Alex. I live over in Oakwood Estates. I'm looking to have a 20-foot flagpole installed in my front yard. Standard stuff, but I have some custom requirements. I need the pole itself to be a custom fabricated hollow aluminum tube that can function as an antenna housing. I also need you to run a discrete underground conduit from my house to the base of the pole, complete with fiber optic and coaxial cable." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought he'd hung up too. Finally, the voice, Gus, spoke. "Let me get this straight. You want a flagpole. That's secretly a giant antenna, to fight with your neighbor over her Wi-Fi feelings?" "Essentially, yes," I admitted. "But it's also a statement about freedom, logic, and the American way. Mostly, though, I just want to watch YouTube in peace. Can you do it?" Another pause. Then, a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. "Son," Gus said, his voice full of newfound amusement, "for the right price, I'd build a launch pad to Mars in your backyard." "Yeah, we can do it. This is the weirdest damn job I've had all year. I love it. I'll be there in an hour to take a look." Gus arrived in a dusty, slightly dented Ford F-250 that looked like it had seen actual work, a stark contrast to the pristine SUVs that usually lined our streets. He was a big guy in his 50s, with a sun-beaten face, a powerful handshake, and a skeptical but intelligent look in his eyes. He was the real deal. We stood on my perfect lawn as I showed him my technical drawings. He listened intently, nodding, occasionally asking sharp, practical questions about wind load and soil composition. "It's doable," he finally said, rubbing his chin. "Gonna have to dig a trench for that conduit. Your lawn's gonna be a mess for a few days." "Gus," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder, "making a glorious, spite-fueled omelet requires breaking a few blades of grass. Do what you have to do." His grin widened. "I like you, kid. We'll start Monday." The work began as promised. Gus and his two-man crew were professional, efficient, and clearly amused by the whole situation. They arrived at 8 a.m. sharp and started by marking out a line across my lawn with spray paint. Then came the trencher. The machine tore a neat, surgical wound across my pristine turf, from the side of my house to the spot we'd marked for the flagpole. The noise, of course, acted like a summoning beacon for Brenda. She was there within minutes, clipboard in hand, phone out to take pictures of the destruction. She marched right up to Gus. "Excuse me," she demanded. "Do you have a permit for this excavation? This is a clear violation of the community's landscaping code." Gus, who was covered in a light sheen of sweat and dirt, didn't even stop what he was doing. He just looked at her over his shoulder. "Lady," he said, his voice flat and unimpressed, "I got a permit from the city that says I can dig this trench. I got a work order that says I'm installing a flagpole. You got a problem with either of those things, you can take it up with them." He gestured vaguely towards the distant town hall. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy installing this, patriotic illumination device." He turned back to his work, completely dismissing her. Brenda stood there, flabbergasted. She was used to intimidating residents who didn't know the rules. She had no idea how to deal with a man who operated with permits, had a job to do, and simply did not care about her opinion. She tried to harass his crew for a while, asking them about their insurance and their footwear, but they just ignored her. Defeated, she retreated to her porch to watch and document every shovelful of dirt. Over the next 2 days, the project came together. The conduit was laid, the cables were run, and a solid concrete base was poured. Finally, the pole itself arrived. It was a beautiful thing. a sleek, tapered white aluminum pole. To the naked eye, it was just a flagpole. But I knew that inside it housed a custom-designed, multi-band directional antenna array. My permanent, silent, elegant solution. Gus and his crew hoisted it into place and secured it to the base. It stood exactly 19.9 feet tall, from the ground to its peak. We even attached a gold eagle to the top, along with a small, solar-powered light to illuminate the flag at night. Just to be extra, maliciously compliant with flag etiquette. I paid Gus, who shook my hand with a grin. "Pleasure doing business with you, Alex. Give me a call if you ever want to build a moat." As they drove off, I walked to the base of the pole and looked up. It was perfect, a symbol of freedom, a beacon of bandwidth. And best of all, a completely legal middle finger pointed squarely at the heart of the HOA. The official notice arrived 2 days after the flagpole was completed. It was delivered by hand, a crisp white envelope slid into my mail slot. Inside, on thick, creamy cardstock, was the summons. "Notice of emergency session," it read in an imperious font. "An emergency session of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association has been called to discuss pervasive and ongoing bylaw violations at 12 Oak Street." The agenda was a greatest hits of my activities over the past week. The unauthorized operation of a commercial vehicle, the creation of a public nuisance via generator noise, the installation of an unapproved broadcast tower, and a new catch-all charge: conduct detrimental to the peaceful enjoyment of the community. The meeting was in 3 days. This was it, the final showdown. That night, my office was no longer a war room. It was a council chamber. Dave was there, of course, functioning as my chief of staff and morale officer. He'd brought pizza this time. We were just laying out our strategy when there was a knock on the door. It was Gus, the contractor. He was holding a 6-pack of domestic beer. "Gus?" I said, surprised. "What are you doing here? Did I forget to sign something?" "Nah," he said, walking in and setting the beer on my desk. "I heard about the meeting. My sister-in-law lives 2 streets over. She's on the email list. That woman, Brenda, she's a piece of work. An insult to sensible people everywhere." He cracked a beer for himself. "I finished your job, but this is a moral crusade. Also, my guys are using your Wi-Fi to get their work orders when they're in the area, so I have a vested interest. What's the game plan?" And just like that, our fellowship was complete. It was like a scene from a heist movie. If the heist was convincing a bunch of suburbanites not to be idiots, Dave was the inside man, the voice of the people. Gus was the muscle, the expert witness with dirt under his fingernails. And I was the mastermind, armed with logic, reason, and a killer PowerPoint presentation. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out our strategy. First, the people. "The petition," Dave announced proudly, slapping a stack of papers on the table. He'd been quietly going door to door, not with an argument, but with a simple question: "Are you happy to have reliable cell service again?" He'd gathered over 50 signatures from grateful households who supported what I was doing. It was our proof of a public mandate. Second, the facts. I took charge of the presentation. It wouldn't be a long, boring, technical lecture. It would be slick, simple, and devastating. I designed it with big fonts, lots of pictures, and simple, declarative statements. It would cover the science, using my microwave analogy, the legality, citing the specific bylaws I was not breaking, with page numbers, and the benefits to the community, showing a map of the new, complete signal coverage. Third, the testimony. Gus's role was crucial. He would be our expert witness. When Brenda inevitably called the flagpole an illegal tower, Gus would stand up and testify, in his plain-spoken, no-nonsense way, that it was a flagpole, It was built to code. It had passed city inspection, and that it was probably safer than the old oak tree on the third green of the golf course that dropped heavy branches every time the wind blew. Finally, I prepared my secret weapon. My ace in the hole. I'd spent the afternoon editing a short 2-minute video. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. It opened with the clip of Dr. Finch's ghost meter having a meltdown next to my microwave. It cut to a clip I'd found on the public access recording of the town meeting where Brenda first proposed the tower shut down, showing her making wild, unsubstantiated claims. Then, the best part, a clip from Officer Miller's body cam, which I'd obtained through a public records request, showing him calmly telling Brenda, "Ma'am, this is a civil matter." The video ended with a montage of short, heartfelt testimonials from happy neighbors. A teenage girl saying she could finally do her homework in her room. A dad saying he hadn't missed a single play of the game all week. We were ready. We had facts, we had witnesses, and we had the will of the people on our side. Let Brenda call her meeting. We were going to turn her tribunal into our premiere. The community clubhouse was a temple of beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs. It was a room designed to suck the life and passion out of any discussion. But tonight, it was electric with tension. The room was packed, split down the middle like a bitterly contested wedding. On the right side sat Brenda's faction, the scowlers, the whisperers, the ones who valued conformity above all else. On the left sat my supporters, the young families, the tech workers, the teenagers, and anyone else who enjoyed living in the 21st century. Dave and I sat in the front row on the left, with Gus next to us, looking as comfortable in the sterile room as a bear in a dollhouse. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat Brenda and her 2 cronies, Carol and Gary. Brenda banged a small gavel, and a hush fell over the room. "This emergency session of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice tight with a sense of historic importance. She proceeded to lay out her case against me, her voice trembling with a carefully rehearsed, righteous fury. She read from a prepared statement, listing my alleged crimes, painting me as a rogue agent, a digital outlaw who had shattered the peace and harmony of their suburban utopia with my noisy machines and invisible poisons. It was a dramatic, if slightly unhinged, performance. "And so," she concluded, looking directly at me, "we are here tonight to vote on levying the maximum allowable fines against Mr. Alexander Sterling for his numerous violations, and to demand the immediate removal of the unapproved broadcast tower he has erected on his property." She sat down to a smattering of applause from her side of the room. A woman with blue hair patted her on the back. "Mr. Sterling," Brenda said, a smug smile on her face, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" "I do, as a matter of fact," I said, standing up calmly. I walked to the podium at the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. The screen behind Brenda flickered to life with the title slide of my presentation. Oakwood Estates, a modest proposal for connectivity and common sense. "Good evening, everyone," I began, smiling at the crowd. "And thank you, Brenda, for calling this meeting and for your obvious passion for the well-being of our community. I share that passion, which is why I felt it was so important to solve the communications crisis you initiated." A few chuckles rippled through my side of the room. Brenda's smile tightened. I clicked to the next slide. It was a picture of my microwave. The slide was titled, "The Science, Is Your Lunch More Dangerous Than Your LTE?" I gave my now perfected, simple explanation of EMF, frequency, and non-ionizing radiation. I didn't treat them like idiots. I treated them like intelligent people who had been given bad information. Next slide. The law, a deep dive into the bylaws. I put up screenshots of the bylaws themselves, with the key phrases highlighted in yellow. the definition of a structure, the rules for recreational vehicles, the precise wording of the flagpole exception. I showed, with irrefutable black and white evidence, that I had not broken a single rule. I had followed her sacred texts to the letter. Next, I called my expert witness. I'd like to call Gus, from Gus's Contracting, who installed the flagpole. Gus lumbered to the front. He was not intimidated. "Evenin'," he grunted. "Brenda, you said that pole is an illegal tower. Well, I'm the one who built it. It's a flagpole. It's under 20 feet, as per your rules. It passed a city inspection, permits on file down at the hall. It's bolted into 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Frankly, it's the best-built flagpole in this whole town. It's safer than that old oak tree on the 3rd green that keeps dropping widowmakers every time the wind picks up." He sat down. His testimony was simple, powerful, and utterly believable. The mood in the room was shifting. My side was nodding confidently. Brenda's side was starting to look uncertain. Now, it was time for the finishing blow. "Finally," I said, "I've put together a short video that I think captures the community's feelings on this issue." I hit play. The room watched as Dr. Finch's meter shrieked at my microwave. They laughed at the grainy footage of Brenda claiming cell towers cause baldness. They roared with laughter at the body cam footage of Officer Miller saying, "It's a civil matter, ma'am," and praising my network. They were visibly moved by the testimonials from their own neighbors. When the video ended, my side of the room erupted in spontaneous, sustained applause. Brenda was aghast. She was losing, and she knew it. She banged her gavel furiously. "This is a travesty!" she shrieked, losing all composure. "He is one man. We are a community. We must vote. We must vote now to have this pole removed and fine him for his transgressions. All in favor of the motion." She raised her hand high, followed by her 2 cronies and a smattering of her most die-hard followers. It was maybe 20 hands in total. "All opposed?" I called out. A forest of hands shot up on my side of the room. Dave and I counted furiously. It wasn't even close. It was an overwhelming, crushing landslide. The motion was defeated. The room exploded. My side was cheering, shaking hands, patting me on the back. Brenda just sat there, staring into space, her face ashen. The Queen had been deposed. The war was over. We had won. A few weeks later, I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying the quiet hum of a perfect suburban afternoon. I was on a crystal-clear video call on my tablet, finalizing a new, even better consulting deal than the one I'd lost. The connection was flawless, piped directly from the sleek white flagpole that stood proudly in my front yard. An American flag waved gently from its peak, its solar-powered light ready for the evening. It was a picture of modern domestic tranquility. The war was a distant memory. Life in Oakwood Estates had found a new, better normal. The front door opened, and Dave came out with 2 cold beers, handing one to me. He sank into the chair beside me. "Just got the email," he said, taking a sip. The new board approved the fiber optic proposal. The fallout from the meeting had been swift. Brenda, in a stunning display of, "If I can't be queen, I'll burn the castle down," had resigned as HOA president the very next day, citing unforeseen personal reasons and a desire to focus on her own wellness journey. The neighborhood, free from her tyrannical reign, had elected a new president, a tech-savvy dad who worked for a software company. His first act was to enthusiastically support a proposal I'd put together to use a federal infrastructure grant to run fiber optic cable to every home in the development. My flagpole had become redundant, a monument to a battle already won. I kept it, of course. It was a matter of principle. "How's Brenda taking it?" I asked, though I already knew. Dave just pointed across the street with his beer bottle. Brenda was in her front yard. She had indeed embarked on a new wellness journey. She'd given up on the invisible threat of electrosmog and had moved on to an even more esoteric enemy. She was holding 2 L-shaped copper rods, dowsing rods, and was walking slowly, methodically across her lawn. "What's she doing now?" I asked. "Apparently," Dave said, trying not to laugh. "The Millers next door to her installed a new sprinkler system, and Brenda is convinced it's disrupting the natural water energy of the block. She's trying to find the negative ley lines." I watched her for a moment as she stopped, the rods crossing dramatically in her hands. She looked down at the grass with an expression of grave concern. "You created a monster, you know," Dave said, shaking his head. "Nah," I replied, taking a long, satisfying drink of my beer. "The monster was always there. I just redirected its energy. Speaking of which, I'm thinking of upgrading the Wanderer. Maybe add some ground-penetrating radar, just for fun." Dave just laughed. "Just try to keep it off my lawn." I leaned back in my chair, the warm sun on my face, the flawless Wi-Fi signal bathing my home. I looked at the flag, at Dave, at Brenda on her pointless quest. It was absurd. The whole thing was absurd. A battle over cell service that became a fight for basic logic. I never wanted to be a suburban revolutionary. I just wanted my memes and my video calls. But when a tyrant, no matter how petty, tries to drag you back into the Dark Ages, sometimes you have to fire up your military surplus command center and become the reluctant hero of the neighborhood. In the end, all it took to bring peace and high-speed internet to Oakwood Estates was one bored engineer, one very capable truck, and an HOA president who made the fatal mistake of picking a fight with the wrong nerd. And you know what? My petunias have never looked more vibrant. Go figure.